On YouTube, Brandon Kills 96 here, coming at you with another video. And today, joyous day, we are going to be talking about my favorite mid laner and my favorite champion in League of Legends. I don't know if you can tell, but today's video is going to go over the Master of Shadows himself, Mr. Zed. The first thing I want to talk about real quick before we get into anything is Zed's lore actually intrigues me a lot. So he was a ninja, and like 200 years ago, he was trained by what I believe, if I remember correctly, is Shen's father, and Shen and Zed used to be like friends or whatever, and then Zed actually assassinated Shen's father, and now I think the way it works is that he wants to claim some sort of power from something, I don't know. Oh well, he took over the city that his old master used to own, and now he rules the city as its leader. So I think that's pretty interesting. He's my favorite champion, the one that most resembles me the most. And let's get on to Zed and how to actually counter Zed. So, one thing that you'll want to notice is that his base attack damage is pretty high and scales really well. So, he's really good at trading pretty much no matter what level he is. He'll be good at trading. As far as skins go, his base skin, pretty awesome. I really don't mind having this skin. Shockblade is the one I use the most, and SKT, I don't have it, but now that it's Legacy, I really want it, because I didn't get it when it was not Legacy, so there is that aspect. But Zed is just going to throw shurikens all over everyone, so let's talk about Zed and how to counter Zed. So, Zed's passive is called Contempt for the Weak. Now, with this, basically, when a target is below 50% health, okay, his first basic attack will deal anywhere from 6 to 10% of the target's maximum health as magic damage. Okay, so they're below 50% health, he strikes them with one auto attack, they lose 6 to 10% of their health. As you can see, it says it can only occur every 10 seconds on the same target. So once you strike them when they're below 50% health, you have to wait 10 seconds, and you can hit them again. I don't think this passive is too fantastic. It's really good for killing people, because if you can get that extra auto attack when they're under 50% health, like when they're at 10% or something like that, it's going to deal, like it said, does 10% of their maximum health. If they only have 10% health left, then that's going to crit them and kill them. So it's pretty nice, but Zed has a Q and an E, but I want to talk about Zed's W first. Okay, Zed's W is called Living Shadow. Now what happens is Zed summons a shadow in front of him or behind him or sideways of him or, any direction on the, on the compass. He can throw that shadow forward for 4 seconds. And this shadow mimics Zed's Q and E abilities. Okay, now if Zed presses W again, he switches places with his shadow. So he presses W and summons a shadow for 4 seconds. The shadow mimics his Q and mimics his E, which I'll get to in a second. Now, if Zed presses W again and he's over here and the shadow's over here, they switch places. Okay, this is good for gap closing on your enemy. You throw your shadow out, you cast all your abilities, and then you teleport to your shadow and auto attack, and then you run away or something like that. But you can swap places. Now, passively, it grants Zed additional bonus AD. So as soon as you hit level 2 and you put a point into your Living Shadow, you're automatically gonna get 5% additional bonus AD. I'm trying to remember exactly what else. But before I go into the next part of this ability, I want to talk about his Q and his E. So Zed's Q is pretty simple. He basically just throws a shuriken forward, and the shuriken just deals a flat amount of AD. It's a pretty simple ability. You throw it, it hits someone, and it deals damage. It's a skill shot, so you do have to dodge it if you're playing as the opponent. I'm trying to think. So the second part of this ability is that the shuriken doesn't hit one enemy and deal damage. It goes through enemies. So what happens is that he throws his shuriken, and let's say there's a line of minions right here. It's going to go through all of those minions and deal all of them damage. So it's pretty good for, like, if you're team fighting against enemies, throw your shuriken out. It can hit everybody on the team. But every subsequent target after the first takes less and less damage. So if you hit the first enemy is going to take the most damage, and like the second through however many enemies are going to take less damage. So as you can see, the first hit will deal 75 flat physical damage plus 100% AD, and every subsequent target after that will get 45 damage and only 60% AD, which is basically 50% less damage than the previous one. Now, one of the things I want to talk about is that when you summon Living Shadow can also cast Zed's Q. So when Living Shadow is out, anything that Zed casts can also be cast by the Shadow. So what happens is that if you throw your Living Shadow out and you cast your Razor Shuriken, your Shadow is going to throw a Razor Shuriken and you're going to throw a Razor Shuriken. If both Razor Shurikens hit the same enemy, you gain energy back. That's what this says. If an ability strikes any target twice, Zed restores energy. So that can be Q or E. But if both you and your Shadow hit an enemy at the same time, then you gain energy back. Anyways, so yeah. So now let's talk about Zed's E. Zed's E is a melee-based ability that basically twirls his blades in a circle and deals a flat amount of AD. 60 base damage plus 80% bonus AD. Another thing that you'll notice is that every champion hit by Zed's Shadow Slash reduces Living Shadow's cooldown by 2 seconds. So you can do this one of two ways. You summon your Living Shadow and then use Shadow Slash with... I'll talk about that combo in a second. But or you can use Living Shadow, switch places with your Shadow, and then use Shadow Slash to deal that flat AD. Another thing is that so every enemy that is hit by Zed's shadowed... okay. If an enemy is hit by Living Shadow casting Shadow Slash, then they are slowed. Okay? So if Zed throws his Living Shadow out and then casts Shadow Slash, because remember, everything that Zed casts, the Shadow also casts. So if a person is hit by the Shadow's Shadow Slash, then they are slowed. Okay? And still dealt the same amount of damage. Zed's ultimate is called Death Mark. This has no cost, and it also deals no damage by itself. So the way that this works is that Zed jumps on a target and puts a giant X on them. Now, during this time, after 3 seconds, the mark, it's called Death Mark, right? So you got a giant X over the target. Now, however much damage you deal to the opponent during the time that death mark is active, that's how much damage it's going to burst for. Now, what I mean by that is once you put that mark on a target, you have to deal as much damage to them before the mark wears off. Okay, now that's going to ensure that you get the kill. So what happens is, so first of all, he becomes untargetable. So during Death Mark, he can't be targeted by any abilities. Stuns, CC, anything. So that's at least maybe like a 1.5 second delay where it's guaranteed that you can't be hit by any abilities. After 3 seconds, once you put the Death Mark on them, okay? Once you put the Death Mark on them, you deal as much damage to them as you possibly can with your Q, W, and E, and then after 3 seconds, the mark pops, dealing 100% attack damage plus 20% of all magic and physical damage dealt by Zed. Now, another thing to note is that Death Mark also summons a shadow. So when you use Zed's W and Zed's R both summon a shadow. So basically a combo that you can use with Zed is that when you ult in on someone, it summons a shadow. If you press your W, it summons a shadow. So now you have 2 shadows plus Zed that you can dash in between if you want to, and remember the shadows also casts the same abilities that Zed casts. So if you use your ult and then you throw your W out, now you have 3 people casting the same spells, right? You have 3 people casting Razor Shuriken, you have 3 people casting Shadow Slash. And it's really effective if you want to get in on someone and deal like a ton of damage. Also, something to note is that Death Mark can also be triggered by offensive spells like Ignite. So, basically, when you use Death Mark, it's going to pop according to how much damage you dealt to them while the mark was active. So, if you pop Ignite while Death Mark is on the target, Ignite counts towards the % health damage it's going to do at the end when it pops. So, using things like Ignite, or using things like, you would never build this, but if you had a Gunblade on Zed, if you used Gunblade during his Death Mark, it would trigger for an extra % health damage, because technically you're still doing damage to the target. Now let's talk about what counters all of these abilities, and then we'll talk about how to get, what we should specifically use. So Contempt for the Weak, there isn't a whole lot to do. Just basically you want to stay away from him when you're under 50% health, because he can dive you, since he can dash to one of his shadows and get away from turret damage. So, Zed is really good at diving because he can just dash to his shadows if he really wants to. Razor Shuriken is a skill shot, and I would say that in the list of skill shots, it's one of the hardest to dodge because it has such a wide hitbox, and it's pretty difficult for you to time when he's going to actually throw it. So the good part about it is you probably want to stand behind your minions. That way, at the very least, he can't get extra damage by hitting you first, if that makes any sense. So if you are going to get hit by Razor Shuriken, then make sure you're not the first one that gets hit by Razor Shuriken. Zed's Shadow, again, there's not much you can really do about it, but I would stay away from the Shadow when he actually throws it out, because you don't want to get Shadow Slashed and slowed by Zed's Shadow. So just try to stay away from the Shadow. Shadow Slash, again, not really anything you can do except for stay away from Zed, because he has to get, basically Shadow Slash can only be used from auto attack range, so he has to get, literally right up next to you in order to use this ability. Death Mark is actually something that can be negated completely. If like I said, after 3 seconds it pops, right? Well, when it pops, you can actually use certain abilities to get out of it. Zanya's, Quicksilver Sash, I think you can actually use Fizz's W to get out of it also. I'm not really sure, but if you Quicksilver Sash Zed's Death Mark, it will go off of you before it pops and not deal that extra damage. Or if you use Zanya's just before it pops, then you won't be dealt that extra damage. So by itself, Zanya's and Quicksilver Sash are both counters to Zed, which is one of the reasons that he's not played in LCS and stuff like that. Even though he's my favorite character, he's really easy to take advantage of, because if he can't use Death Mark for that extra damage, then he doesn't have anything left. You know what I mean? So now, rather than talking about like specific characters that you can counter Zed with, I'd rather just look at a list of the champions and tell you what's good and what's not. Because I feel like I personally play Zed so aggressively that it's hard to find a specific counter for Zed. So let's talk about the champions, and I'll go through a couple of the mid laners that I think are good against Zed, or we'll just go over some of the mid laners in general. So Ahri versus Zed is a matchup that I see very often, and it's a matchup that I would actually probably put Ahri's way. The reason is because if you took my skill level on Ahri and you took my skill level on Zed and you put them together and you like face them off against each other, I feel like it would be easier for Ahri. Now, in my first video on this series, I talked about how Ahri had a problem with melee champions because if they can get in her face, it's really hard for her to land her charm and like land her abilities. But the problem with Zed is that once he uses all of his damage, like let's say he uses his shadow, he throws his Q out, he shadow slashes Ahri. If she's not dead at that point, then she has all of that time to use her charm against you. Because as Zed, the only thing you can do is dodge her charm. If you can dodge her charm and you actually miss it, then you do have a chance to actually go back in and kill her. But if you get hit by that charm, you're probably going to die. Akali, I would not counterpick Zed with Akali, because basically Akali's abilities are the same as Zed almost. And I would definitely give the edge to Zed because Zed can't be targetable by his ult, and Akali kind of relies on her ult to actually do damage. So I wouldn't pick that matchup. Anivia, I would probably give that to Zed also, because I feel like even though Anivia can put the wall up, and even though like she has the egg, still I feel like Zed can kill her a lot easier than she can kill Zed. But her passive makes her really hard to kill. You have to watch out for her passive, because let's say you're Zed and you want to dive Anivia under turret. If her passive is up, then you basically took like 2 or 3 turret shots for absolutely nothing, since she can revive with her passive. So it might be an okay pick against Zed, but we'll see. Annie's kind of hard for Zed, but I don't think she's that hard. I think I would still give that to Zed because like Zed can easily gap close on Annie when she doesn't have her stun. If Annie has her stun, you might want to play a little bit passive, but as soon as that stun is down, you can go all in on her and probably kill her pretty easily. Azir is a character that I find interesting to play against Zed because I don't know. I mean, Zed is a melee champion, so when Azir summons his soldiers, it's going to be hard for Zed to CS because they'll always have to get close. But Zed can CS with his Q. The only thing is that if you are playing against Azir as Zed, I would take cooldown reduction instead of magic resistance. Now, why do I say that? Like, why would I take cooldown reduction instead of magic resistance? Because all Azir deals is magic damage. Well, the thing about the Zed Azir matchup is that as the Zed player, you're losing magic resistance to gain the ability to cast more spells, right? So if you're going to be CSing with your Q as Zed instead of trying to auto attack, then you're going to need extra cooldown reduction to actually allow your abilities to come up more quickly. So I would take cooldown reduction instead of magic resistance if I was going against Azir. Magic resistance might be okay. And also, if you're, you can switch your armor yellows out for like scaling health yellows, and that might help you out a little bit. Brand, I don't know about Brand. I think Brand is pretty similar to Ahri in the sense that if he doesn't land his stun, there's not much he can really do. His Pillar of Fire is a pretty interesting ability, and I think it would be hard for Zed to actually dodge, but I still wouldn't really pick Brand into Zed. I don't know. Cassiopeia, I feel like she's too immobile for too immobile for an actual counterpick to Zed. I feel like Zed is way more mobile than her. Cho'Gath is probably a counterpick to Zed in the mid lane, because if Cho'Gath can silence Zed, then Zed can't use his shadow. And all Cho'Gath has to do is walk up, W, and then Q, and there's no way that Zed can dodge his rupture. So I would say Cho'Gath is an example of one counterpick. I don't really want to go through all of these. I think Fizz is a counterpick to Zed. So we have Cho'Gath, we have Fizz, because of the way that Fizz's abilities are set up, he can almost dodge everything that Zed can throw at him. Plus, I think Fizz has a little bit more trading potential than Zed. It's definitely an interesting matchup. I'm just going to look through here and see if there's any other counterpicks I feel like are worthy of like talking about. LeBlanc is another matchup I see quite often. LeBlanc versus Zed. Malzahar would be a counterpick probably. If Zed gets anywhere close, he can just silence him and put his aids on him, and like they can't do anything. So, yeah. Orianna would be good because she can put the shield on herself to block almost every incoming damage, and she can use Shockwave to stop Zed from trying to get the ult off on her. That's about it as far as that goes. So we have Cho'Gath, who I think is the biggest counterpick, because if Cho'Gath silences him, then there's absolutely nothing he can do. Plus, Cho'Gath gets too tanky during the mid and late game, and once he hits level 6, he can start feasting, and he gets like a ton of health, to the point that Zed's Q and all of his abilities just don't even do damage to Cho'Gath. So I feel like Cho'Gath is probably the biggest counterpick to Zed. Fizz is another counterpick, and probably Malzahar are definitely picks you can use to counter Zed, but I would use Cho'Gath. And if you can't do that, or you don't know how to play Cho'Gath, or whatever else the case may be, as far as extra options, one of the things you can do is you could get a cloth armor. So starting off the game, rather than getting your normal item, you could get a cloth armor and 5 pots, I think it is. I think it's 5 pots. No, it's 3 pots. Cloth armor, 3 pots. But you can do something like that. You can take the summoner spell Heal or Barrier if you're afraid of Zed's damage, and you don't think you're going to be able to get away from him or actually kill him. Those are definitely things you can do. But as Cho'Gath especially, you're going to become too tanky for Zed to do damage to you, and you're going to absolutely demolish him in the mid to late game, because he's just not going to be able to do enough damage to you. Even with his death mark, your abilities just aren't going to be able to kill him. So Cho'Gath would probably be my counter pick in this case. I want to thank you guys for watching this video, and stay tuned for more videos. Please post in the comments what else you guys want to see, and let me know. Make sure you watch the other 3 parts of this series. Have a wonderful day, and